'Tis your will, my master.
Hey, good morning, Eric. Quick demo video for you for your Vader's Vault Wraith that you sent to me to fully customize. I had never done one of these before, and as you know, because you're the one telling me, right, this is something that every etcher should do one time. I don't really consider myself an etcher. I do etch, um, but I was looking forward to doing one of these one day, and the opportunity presented itself with you. This will be the last one I ever do because this guy is just a monstrosity, and it takes a long time, right? I etched this in a Lord of the Rings theme. But you've got the inscription. You actually have to read it like this, but you've got the two inscriptions from the ring on each of these ribs. There's 8 ribs. There's 2 lines of an inscription, so I was able to evenly put each line on each of these ribs up here like that. Hopefully that's picking up on camera, but if not, I sent you the pictures, right? And you got the handle here. This is the maybe you could see this up close like you saw it in the pictures. I liked that. I liked how it had the sword down on the bottom of the tree. Then just put some different greeblies on these different bump outs, and then of course over here on the pommel I put these on here. So in total, like on a flagship, you'd have, I don't know, 1, 2, 3, maybe like 5 or 6 different etch templates that you'd have to put onto your saber so that you could bake it, put the design on the saber, and then you could etch it. This one had 33 different templates that had to be taped onto this thing to make this work. Each of these are different. These bump outs, these ribs over here, these ribs in the middle handle section, they're all different templates, right? Because this handle is curved, so you can't have this on one sheet of PMP blue. It has to be broken up so that you could transfer the etch properly. But it came out good, I think, and then I went ahead and I powder coated it. This is a technique that my buddy Pete Sandoval over at Bad Batch Etching taught me to do a 2-tone. So up here, I just did not I did not powder coat these ribs black. I just did the insides, and then I weathered the etching on the words a little bit before I went over it with the gold. But over here, I did do the 2-tone, right? So you get the black powder coat in between here with the gold on top of the etching to really make it pop out. So I thought that came out really nice. This is something I'm really proud of because it was so difficult, right? And then that was almost the easy part. And then I had to get to installing this guy. So you've got CC sabers in here for your lit PCB. This small grub screw down here is what holds your PCB in place, and then this one up top here is your blade retention, although I'm not going to use it. In this section right here, it is about 1 inch diameter for your blade, and then it stops about right here and it drops down to 0.99 inches. And that PCB holder is right there in the 0.99 inch area, but you'll notice, and you probably won't see it on camera, but you can almost see where it changes there. Your blade goes down into the 0.99 inch diameter in order to touch those pins. So I'm not even having to use the blade retention. I don't know if that's something that you'll have to do or not, all right? But I just want you to be aware that it gets pretty tight in there. How you get to the chassis is you want to unscrew the pommel. Well, before we do that, though, I'll talk about this saber. It comes apart in 3 pieces. I think this is the V2 version. So this top ribbed portion is 1 piece. The handle screws off, and then also the pommel screws off. But because your switches are in your handle, that's your main activation switch right here, a 16 millimeter. And then over here, I put a different domed tactile switch in it than the one that came with it. I popped that out and threw it away, and I used this one. But because the switches are in the handle, you can't have a static chassis and still have removable batteries set up, right? So do not unscrew this guy from here and here, the handle and the top rib section. Leave that alone. I tightened it down pretty tight so it won't come loose on you. But don't do that, right? The only place you want to unscrew this saber is right here from the pommel. And we'll do that now. And when you take your pommel off, you'll see your chassis in here. So you just want to take your hand. It's going to be a little tight, but take your hand, do like that a few times. It'll pop out and you can pull it out just like that. And we'll talk about the chassis here in a second. But what you've got in here, if you can see that in the light, it's a Smuggler's Outpost 14-pin switch pixel PCB set, and that's what allows me to make this removable chassis setup. So you got the 14-pin side in there that never comes out, and of course you've got the other side into your chassis right here, right? For your speaker, I had to make the speaker separate from the chassis because there's just almost zero room from the end of this switch to the end of this handle, right? I think this entire chassis piece is like 3.86 inches long. So that's not very much length at all. I had to take the speaker and make it separate. So you have a 24 millimeter Smuggler's Outpost speaker in here and its own speaker pod. Of course, you got that speaker PCB right there. And then, you know, when you get this in person, you'll be able to see your speaker in there. But I made sure I backed that speaker up as far back as I could so you have some nice sound resonance and it sounds really good. Normally, here's the pins for your speaker, the pogo pins that match up with this PCB. Normally you'd have this piece, it would be flush with your chassis if you're using a PLA. But because I had to take this, and this is what pushes up against the chassis and makes contact with those pins, I didn't want to stress those pins, and it's actually recessed in the chassis a little bit. You'll see that. It's just for the sake of being able to take this guy and seriously crank on it and push it forward, and I don't damage the pins. This was supposed to be a 0.99 inch diameter chassis. This is a type of resin that I haven't used before. I bought it specifically for this saber. I couldn't find a translucent yellow, which is really what I wanted, but I thought the green worked as well because you wanted a chassis that lights up. So this one does. It has a 10 pixel strip over here, and then inside it has a 10 pixel strip over here as well. There are some inscriptions on the chassis that it will not show up on camera, but they're just you know, it says Solo Sabers over here for me, and then it says for behold, the storm is coming over here on the other side. And this is kind of like some Lord of the Rings type font. You'll just never see that if I hold it up in the camera, but you'll see it when you get it in person. Anyway, it was supposed to be 0.99 inches, but because of the variance and the variance in the resin, this came out to 0.98 inches when it all printed out. And I decided to go ahead and try to install it anyway. The difference between a 0.98 inch chassis and a 0.99 inch is huge in terms of wire management. This almost didn't fit. This board is definitely glued down. I got the fonts on here that you gave me. They all do have boot sounds. The caveat to that is when you originally put the battery in, you're not going to hear the boot sounds because you need the chassis out of the saber to do that. And when it's out of the saber, it's not hooked up to the speaker. So if you cycle through some fonts, you might get those boot sounds. But initially on startup, when you put the battery in, you're not going to hear them. Each font has the chassis doing a little something different, and then it is on a timer, so it will go out eventually if you don't ignite the saber. This is the smallest diameter chassis I've ever installed. And I've never attempted to do something this small and put these accent strips in it. It was a super cram food job. It just did not want to fit, you know, but we got it to fit, obviously. And that's what the chassis looks like, basically. You won't see it again on camera, but when you get it in person, this little shelf right here has this picture of the tree in it, but it does not have the sword part on the bottom. It's just the normal picture that you would see when you watch the movie right here in on the shelf area. So now, after all that, right, here's your battery I'm going to send with the saber. I've got a battery that doesn't have the sticker on it, and I was having a little bit of trouble getting the auxiliary button to work. So the battery does need the sticker on it, but you need to put the sticker inside the chassis, right? So that's what we'll do right now. And then that's what your chassis does. You can see both sides pretty good from there, lighting up. And it just lights this whole thing up really well. So if I turn the light off, especially, right, I mean, this thing is just fired up. See it from the back. You'll see that really good when we put it in the saber. So now when we got this in there, you want to kind of take this board and face it up towards the main switch. Okay, so we'll do that. Now you're going to notice when we put this chassis in with the battery, it's super tight. But that's okay. So we'll get it in there. It's going to be very tight. We'll just go ahead and push it in place. You want to get it past the threads a little bit here in the pommel section. You don't have to push it all the way up if you don't want to. Just give it a little bit of like that. You can still see those LEDs lighting up the chassis from right here. And then when we screw this on, the pommel does the rest of the work. You'll feel it when it tightens up. We'll lock it down, right? Turn it on. Auxiliary over here. Now, when it comes to motion controls, I did not give you a motion on feature because the chassis is so tight. There's so much finagling that you have to do to get it in. It's a little bit of a process. I didn't want it going off on you accidentally. So there's no motion to turn it on. You turn it on with a switch. What I did give you though is twist off. So you could utilize that if you want, but if you didn't want to, just tap the button again. That turns it off as well. Okay. We'll go ahead and we'll play the soundtrack real quick on this particular font before we put the blade in. Nice and clear. It's a long press on the power to get your soundtrack playing, and then it's another long press to get it to turn off. And then, of course, we'll just tap the auxiliary when the saber is off to change sound fonts. From the ashes of destruction, I was that survivor. Now, when I put a blade in here, I like to turn the saber on because the socket is so tight that I can't feel when I hit those pins. So I'll turn the saber on while I'm putting the blade in. As soon as I see my blade light up, that tells me I can stop. Okay. I'm just going to keep going on it. Now those pins touch, I know I can stop. I had to use my small test blade because my normal test blade just won't fit. It'll get stuck. You might have to do some sanding because, like I said, there's an area about this long where your blade goes down, and it's 0.99 inches inside this emitter. So, 1 inch blade, it's going to need to be sanded. Good smooth flowing. Good flash on flash. Go to another sound font. I know the true power of the dark side. Oh, no swing on, I forgot. I made this one a yellow unstable because you have a gold powder coat. I thought it went well with it. Play the soundtrack.
It is the Darksaber.
So you can see everything's working like it should. We'll go ahead and take the blade out and go over taking the chassis out. This is where it can be a little tedious, you know, but it's possible, right? So want to unscrew the pommel. We'll get this out of the way. You can still see your chassis kind of flaring up, right? With that battery in it, it's a super tight fit, right? So we're going to do the same thing we did to take the chassis out without the battery. Cup your hand so your chassis doesn't go flying, although it won't. It's just a good practice. Beat it up against your hand a few times until it pops out about that much, and then you can go ahead and grab it and pull it out. I'm going to take this battery out real quick, but from the positive side over here by this PCB, you should be able to pop it out with your finger just like that. But because it's so tight, if you can see that up against my shirt right here, kind of made a groove around this piece right here where the speaker pogo pins are at. That's easy for you to grab and pull out, right? So it's not smooth and your finger's not sliding off of it. And then we'll just go ahead and we'll put this chassis back in, the Saber for safekeeping. And that is pretty much your Wraith. You know, let me know if you got any questions. If not, I will package this guy up and it will go out Monday morning because it's Saturday and the post office here is closed. All right. Thanks, man.